Welcome back to Around the 412. We are part of the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I am Tyler, and with me as always is my co-host, Smitty, rocking the bucket hat if you're watching on YouTube, looking really fly right now. What's going on, man?
Did you see what it says? It's
Yeah,
a Yinshurst bucket hat. Okay.
Yeah.
Make sure that we were on the same page here and everybody knew. So if you're listening to the episode, obviously you're not going to see it. So I would head to YouTube just so you can see this alone. This is the white version. Now, here's the thing. You're not going to be able to purchase it anyway. These things are all sold out. I was able to get my hands on one. Black, gold, white. You can't get your hands on them anyway. So, but here it is, rocking it. Shout out to them. I'm hearing whispers that they're coming back very soon from their off-season hiatus. So hopefully that is in the near future. I know people want them back. So, but let's jump into some sports talk since that's what we are here to do. Let's start with the Pirates, who are at kind of that unofficial halfway point, if you will, with the All-Star break being right now. What to you are some, surprises, whether that be good or bad? I know that obviously, Jack Sawinski, I don't think anybody thought that he would come up and have 14 home runs at this point. So you probably put that in a category of a nice surprise. Yoshi Tsutsugo was signed for $4 million. That might not sound like much, but for the Pirates, that's a pretty decent investment on a one-year contract. He showed a nice little sample size last year. And I think that they obviously expected more. So, that falls into the disappointment. Somebody like Josh Vanmeer doesn't apply here to me because I think that we knew what we were getting when we brought him over. But in your opinion, what have you seen both for and against, good and bad, from the Pirates at the halfway point?
So I'll start with my surprises for the Pirates. You said one of them, Jack Sawinski, coming up as a rookie and performing really right away. I mean, he's not like an all-star by any means, but for how many home runs he's hit, how consistent he's been for the time he's gotten during the season, I think that no one really could have predicted that guy was going to come up and do that. And so that's definitely a surprise I had. Another one was Jose Quintana on the pitching side. I don't think any of us really thought like he was going to be that decent of a starting pitcher for the Pirates this season. I think that most of us probably predicted like he'd probably be around their like 4 or 5 starter if he even like remains a starter at that point. We didn't know what he had left in the tank. I mean, this wasn't 2015 Jose Quintana. I'm sure all of you Pirates fans remember the rumors back then about that whole thing. So it was just a different player that we were signing up to get. And I think we were all pleasantly surprised from what we've got from Quintana so far. He's turned out to be one of the really solid additions to that starting room. And I think that moving forward, I mean, there's talks of like he could be like one of their better trade pieces. Like, and before I go on to that,
them an option.
Yeah. Like, do you think that they'll probably move on from him to come the trade deadline?
It's tough to say because shout out to Jason Mackey, who's one of the best covering the Pirates, just behind Alex Stumpf, of course, of DK Pittsburgh Sports. But he put out he's going to be very sad when he's not able to watch Jose Quintana pitch for the Pirates every 5 days. So to me, it seems like the media that covers the team has a little bit of a sense that he would be moved. And maybe I'm reading too much into that statement, but to me, I would be my first choice out of all this would be to have him back next year on another 1-year deal. Now, would he want to do that? I don't know, because he might be looking for a move to a contender this year. And it's like, I know people are throwing around the idea, trade him this year and then sign him back in the offseason. Like, when does that happen? We're not talking about like an Aroldis Chapman situation here with the Yankees or anything like that. Like, what incentive would Quintana have to come back and pitch for the Pirates if he has other suitors? I think he's a Pirate right now because he had to rebuild that value. He didn't have other suitors to go to last offseason. If you're asking me what I think is going to happen, I think that they do move him at the deadline, but I would rather him pitch out this season and then try to work on him being back next year.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to need the starting arms, but I think that we talked last week, I think maybe about like guys like David Bednar and Brian Reynolds and why you don't move on from guys like that. And I feel like Jose Quintana, at least I can see why you make the case, or like while he has the value, you do move on from a guy like that because it's an older guy. He's not really going to be expected to be here whenever they are good. and
Mm-hmm.
you sign him on a 1-year deal. It's not like we have term for him, so you might as well get the value
Right.
out of him if you're not going to be planning on signing him next year, if you don't even think you could sign him. Because I mean, for the way he's been pitching and what he's shown, he might earn a little bit more of a contract with a different team next year as well. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and another guy that I came to mind for me for a pleasant surprise this season was Daniel Vogelbach, Smitty himself, sitting across from me.
I'm
I
why you're
think
doing it.
I really didn't expect him to perform the way he has, like with he's leading the team with RBIs, which is really surprising to me considering like who some of the guys on this team are.
And
And
yeah,
then
and he doesn't always play against lefties.
exactly,
You
and
know,
then
yeah.
he's hit a fair share of home runs himself. He has like 10 or so, I think, and at one point was the best leadoff hitter in baseball. Throwback. But I think that for a cheap signing, I think he's been a pleasant surprise, and he's one of the guys like wasn't really expecting a lot out of him, but he hasn't been, like I said with Sawinski, he hasn't been an all-star, but he's contributed enough to where it's like, okay, I'm noticing you and you've been good. But now moving on to the bad, one of the guys you already brought up, Yoshi Tsutsugo. I mean,
Yeah.
bringing him back at $4.5 million, he's done basically nothing. A lot of the times I don't know why he plays. When he does, he's really just been very disappointing this year based off of what we thought maybe we could get out of him after last year.
Yeah.
Not really much else to say for that about me, and then moving on to another pitcher. I mean, I said Jose Quintana for the good, Bryce Wilson for the bad. I mean, we had like maybe a little bit of like hope that he could turn it around and be a decent starting pitcher. I mean, when I say decent, I mean like maybe just hovering around like a 4 something ERA. I think his ERA is like 7 something right now. He's just been a disaster in my opinion. I think every time he goes on the mound, it's kind of expected. I'm thinking he's going to give up at least like 5 to 6 runs, maybe gets to the 4th inning. And that's just overall. I think he's been a pretty big disappointment out of like who we expected to be, because I expected him to be better than Quintana,
Well,
but he
that's an
hasn't been.
interesting point that I, not to cut you off, but like I think before the season we thought Bryce Wilson was like the surest thing of what he was going to be. Not that he was going to be the best pitcher, but like there's such variation of what you're going to get from Mitch Keller and JT Brubaker, and we thought
Right.
Quintana was going to stink. It's like Bryce Wilson we thought would at least be like a back end of the rotation arm, and we've seen him go down to AAA. Now he did come back up. He made a really nice start the first time back up from AAA. Last time, I don't know. We don't really know how that start would have gone. Sheldon had a very short leash on him, 3 2/3 innings. I think he pulled him after, and he'd
Yeah.
only given up 1 run at that point. So, I mean, he must have really felt like that was a pivotal point in the game, and it was right before the All-Star break too. So obviously he can kind of empty the tank with the bullpen. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you there. The last thing that I want to throw out, I don't know if you have any more, is going to go to the bullpen because they obviously haven't been great. There's been, sporadically we've seen, Bednar, Will Crow. They're both having really good seasons. Dylan Peters before injury, he hasn't looked like the same guy since coming back. But to me, if they were going to have a decent bullpen, it would have relied on this guy, is Chris Stratton. He has not been that this year, and I was hoping that he'd be decent enough for them to be able to flip at the deadline. And people are always looking for relievers, but it's kind of changed like what you're going to get for a guy like that at the very least.
Yeah, a lot of guys have been hit or miss in the bullpen, I feel like, this year. But one of the guys, actually, just thinking about the bullpen now, pleasant surprise. I mean, I don't think either of us really thought Will Crow was going to be performing as well as he has, like,
Oh,
for
that
the majority
transition
of
has
the
been
season out of
seamless.
the bullpen.
Yeah.
It made it really easy. And then, I mean, David Bednar was kind of expected after last year. Last position, and it's not even player, it's just really, honestly, a position for me out of disappointment, is just flat out catchers. I think
Yeah.
that it's tough because, like, what do I really expect from these guys? I don't know how much I can even really expect from them. Roberto Perez, I think, would have been doing all right this season. I think he got off to a solid start from what we were expecting. And then the injury happened, and it just kind of derailed the catching position. And then you have like Heineman, Michael Perez, and just like other guys coming in, and all these guys are just not performing, at least offensively. A couple of them okay defensively, but I just think overall the catching position for the Pirates this year has been a disappointment. And it started with Roberto Perez, not his play, just a disappointment that he got hurt and is out for the rest of the season.
Yeah, maybe by the time that the end of the season comes, we can talk about Jason DeLay being a nice surprise and kind of
Right.
rejuvenating the catcher position, depending on how much they let him, kind of roll with this. Because to me, what do you have to lose at this point? I would give him more starts than Heineman probably the rest of the way, and just see if you have anything there. But yeah, I'm with you though. I mean, the catcher position has obviously been something that the Pirates just really haven't been able to figure out in recent years, along with a lot of other things. And this year's been no different. Probably, without looking, I would assume they have just about the worst production in the league at that position.
I mean, I don't think any of them. Well, let's see. What was Roberto Perez batting? And I know batting averages and everything.
He only played a handful of games,
but he was still at least batting above. His batting average started with a 2.
Yeah,
So
233 with a 333 on base.
yeah, so that's pretty solid compared to the rest of his competition this year. Everybody's batting like a 1 something, and I mean, like you said, DeLay might be someone to turn it around. He's in this short sample size. He's looked decent, but everybody else is kind of rough.
Yeah. But they will return in the very near future. They're going to have the Marlins coming to town post All-Star break. Get Blyman Driss back on the big club. That's how we'll end it. That's how we'll end this segment.
Yeah.
All right, but when we come back, we're going to talk some Penguins. Obviously, man, a lot to talk about there. They completely reshaped this defense, and they still have the same amount of defensemen, though. So we're going to talk about that when we come back. This is Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. And welcome back to Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. I'm Smitty, that is Tyler, and you, listening or watching to this, should subscribe to wherever you're listening or watching to this. Leave us a 5-star review, comment, get all that good stuff. You guys know at this point, we're just going through the motions. Let's talk about the Pens, because they did a lot of things over the last week to reshape the defense. They had 9 defensemen on one-way deals, so we knew that there's something's got to give here, right? So we knew that they were going to have some moving defensemen. They actually traded 2. Here's the thing: they brought in more defensemen in their place, so they still have 9 NHL contracted defensemen, one-way deals. John Marino goes to New Jersey for Ty Smith and a 3rd-round pick. Mike Matheson, the one guy that we really hadn't talked about as far as like a trade piece, thinking like we didn't think that was a possibility coming off the year that he had last year, goes to Montreal, and they bring in a guy. DK was on this at the draft, Jeff Petrie. They were talking with the Canadians about this deal for over a week. It comes to fruition. I mean, where do we start to unpack this? Let's start with the Marino trade for a 3rd-round pick and Ty Smith. Maybe selling high here on Marino in terms of Ty Smith has a very high ceiling. He's only 22 years old. He played really well as a 20-year-old. Wasn't so good as a 21-year-old playing next to PK Subban. I think we got to keep that in mind as well. John Marino, I feel like the Penguins thought had kind of peaked. We never saw him grow his offensive game. He did play a lot better. He was probably their best defenseman or 2nd best defenseman in that playoff series against the Rangers. And I think defensively, we saw him get better. But I think from the Penguins standpoint, maybe smart business here, thinking we didn't hand this guy this contract. Rutherford probably paid him a little too soon, and he's not going to live up to this.
Yeah, it's the thing. We saw Marino have a great rookie season, and then Rutherford just pulled the trigger, gave him a 6-year deal, 4x4 or 4.4x6. And at the time, it looked good. Like what we saw from his rookie year, if he can build on that, we were talking about this guy being the next Chris Letang in the Penguins organization. Obviously, that didn't happen. A super big sophomore slump. He kind of came back a little bit this year, but not offensively. He did get better defensively. And Hextall, Burke, they didn't sign this guy. They've got no loyalty to him. They don't have to love him as a player. And you're right. I think that his time was up in Pittsburgh in terms of just like the front office being enamored with them. And I don't know that they actually ever were. And so something had to give. And now Ty Smith, I know a lot of people were questioning it. It's like looking at the underlying numbers, like this dude's really bad at defense. He's an offensive defenseman and all that sort of stuff. But people got to remember, underlying numbers only tell like part of the story. A lot of that also has to do with
the ghost of PK Subban.
I'll say your line mate has to do with it. Your team that you're playing on has to do with it. New Jersey's been a bottom 5 team the past like 3 or 4 years. So I'm willing to give Ty Smith the benefit of the doubt that I think that he can come here. And I think that within the Penguins organization and the way the Penguins play too, and also the person that we brought in the day or 2 days before or 3 days before, Jan Ruda was signed by the Penguins as well. We didn't mention that, but that was kind of like the key indicator where Marino could be moved. And I know you were going to get to it, but I feel like I had to bring it up because once they signed another right-handed defenseman, I'm like, okay, or like right side defenseman, I'm like, okay, this is where like you could see one move. Before that, I didn't think Marino was going to get moved because who else were they going to play there at that point? But then they do, and so I think when you pair a guy like Jan Ruda and Ty Smith together, if that's going to be the case, then that gives Ty Smith the ability to have a more stable defensive defenseman to be able to do what he can do offensively. I mean, this guy's has good pedigree as a hockey player. He's picked 18th overall in the 2018 draft, something like that. So I think that he has the pedigree to be a good player. Maybe he just needs the right system. And it seems like the first thing that happens whenever offensive defensemen comes here is their play gets better, a la Justin Schultz, a la Mike Matheson. Honestly, even though we just shipped him out, I was going to say,
I think that's kind of the blueprint, though. You know, I understand that they traded Mike Matheson, but I think they also I don't think that they disliked Mike Matheson. As I don't think that them trading him for Jeff Petrie was an indication of that. I think that they did like him, and I think that they laid a blueprint for what they can do to rejuvenate Ty Smith with the way that they rejuvenated Mike Matheson.
Yeah, and honestly, thinking about Marino, how much value did you have with him? I know people said like you didn't get a lot of value out of this, should have packaged him something, but like around the league, I don't think John Marino was looked at like a lot of Penguin fans have looked at John Marino, and I think Penguin fans are still enamored over that first season in the hopes that he could play like that, but I just don't think that was going to be the case. And maybe we're wrong. Maybe he lives up to that $4.5 million contract, but as long as it's not in Pittsburgh and he's not experimenting with it, then so be it.
Yeah, I mean, I like Marino as a player. Like, I don't want this to end up being a thing where I'm like, we're just crapping on him. But like,
I have a game used stick of Marino. Of course, I like him.
The other part of this too, like why I thought that he would have a little bit more value, maybe be able to be a headliner should a Canucks deal ever come about, like we've been talking about for so long. Was the fact that like looked at those contracts that were being handed out during free agency, something like did Branson getting a 4x4? I was like, man, you got to be able to get something decent then for like John Marino or Marcus Pettersson, whichever one they're going to move. Those were the two that we thought at the time were possible. I was going to move to Petrie and then Ruda, but you brought up Ruda, so we can go there because once like Marino moves, right, my instant thought is, man, so you got Chris Letang, who's obviously going to log the most minutes on the right side, but behind him, Ruda played somewhere between 13 to 15 minutes a game. Like, I understand that he was playing a lot on the top line, pretty much all those minutes with Victor Hedman, and that's great, but he's not a guy that's ever like logged the type of minutes that you need from a second pairing right-hand defenseman for this team.
Right.
So I was like, something's got to give here because like Letang, Ruda, Ruido, I don't mind that necessarily on the right side, but where are these minutes coming from? Like, you're asking for a big jump there from somebody, because Ruda and Ruido both, like I said, like 15 minutes max types of guys. So I like the signing, by the way, when you consider, like I just mentioned, did Branson getting a 4x4? I think that it's pretty solid business by the Penguins to get Ruda at 3 years. What was it, like $2.5 million or something like that?
2.75.
2.75. Yeah, I mean, that's good business to me to bring him in on that type of deal. I like him. I think that he's kind of like this steady presence for, like you mentioned, like a puck moving defenseman, like a Ty Smith, should they do that. What's interesting about him, real quick, to go backwards here, is Ty Smith played, and Taylor of DT Pittsburgh Sports pointed this out too. He's played a lot on the right side though too. Like, he has that versatility the opposite way that Mark Friedman does as a righty playing on the left side. So it'll be interesting to see. He can do either one. But should those two play together, I think that's kind of like the best path for getting Ty Smith back on the trajectory it looked like he was on after his rookie year. And then the Petrie trade comes in, and it makes sense from the standpoint of DK pointing out that they've been talking about this for a while, but $6.25 million for the next 3 years. You don't love that aspect of the deal. But I think in the immediate future next year, with these moves, as much as I like Marino, I like what Matheson did last year. I think right now the Penguins are a better team on defense all around than what they were last year. I think for at least next season, probably the year after that, Jeff Petrie is a really good number 2 right-handed defenseman.
Yeah, and I mean overall net numbers. Now Ty Smith is going to be an RFA next year, so you have to extend him a qualifying offer, and we'll see what his deal looks like then. But
Mm-hmm.
you still got rid of cap technically by doing these trades, and I think that what we've seen from this is that the signing of Jan Ruda, the trade for Jeff Petrie. I mean Ty Smith doesn't really fit this bill, but like we know that Burke and Hextall wanted to get like bigger, bulkier, and that wasn't necessarily doesn't mean like the entire team. It doesn't necessarily mean the forwards, a la like a
They
Ryan Reeves,
specifically
Tom
said on the
Wilson
back
type.
end, yeah.
It was on the blue line, which I mean,
Uh-huh.
honestly, I can't blame them. There's a lot of times where the Penguins would get beat up in front of their own net, and maybe that has to do with just the play of the defenseman. But I don't know that having the size back there would hurt it as well. And whenever you're getting the size mixed with players that can actually play, then I think that's a good combination. And so
Yep.
I think that what they've done here is being able to beef up their blue line while getting players that can play. Like Jan Ruda, I am perfectly fine with him as a third pairing defenseman, especially if he's like paired with Ty Smith, so Ty Smith can be allowed to be offensive. Jeff Petrie, like you said, if that's your second right-handed defenseman, that's great. Sure, the cap isn't great; it's for 3 more years, but as long as he plays like he has, I mean, it's fine. I can live with it. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think at least defensively, I agree with you. I think that overall, especially playing defense, I think the team got better. And then you're adding in guys that could chip in more on the offensive side as well. And I know you're missing goals from Mike Matheson, but hopefully Ty Smith and Jeff Petrie can
Oh,
chip in a little
Petrie
bit
could score double-digit goals. Yeah.
yeah, so hopefully they can add up and like chip in for the lack of Matheson. But like for example, John Marino, 2 goals in his last 118 games. You're not going to be really missing anything offensively there from the Penguins. I think they did a great job in these deals. But it is curious to me that whenever they did the signings, they were like, okay, we have, and it was asked. I don't know if Danny asked it or if someone else asked it, but it was like you have 9 defensemen on NHL contracts.
Mm-hmm.
Like it feels like something's got to give, and Hextall is like, yeah, it's most likely that somebody's going to be on the move out. But then the 2 trades you make, you get 2 defensemen out, but you bring back 2 more defensemen. And so
Mm-hmm.
that leaves me to think, like, how can he say, like, okay, we have 9 guys on NHL contracts, we're going to be moving one out, and then bring in 2 more defensemen and then take back his word on it? I just don't think that's the case. It leads me to
Yeah.
think that Hextall is not done at this point. Now, I don't know what defenseman's going to be next. Who could it be based off of, like, who's left that has some value for a trade piece? But I don't know what the plan is as far as forwards go, but that's where they need to look next for sure. Yeah. And if they stick with 9 defensemen, then it just confuses me even more why he would say you're expecting guys to be moved out when they had 9 defensemen on Thursday and then they traded for and still had 9 defensemen on Saturday.
Right. Yeah, and I'm sure you had in your mind, but like just so the people understand, like you said, going back on his word, because he said, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's another move coming. But like,
yeah,
you didn't. You still have the same amount of one-way deal defensemen on the roster. So
that's what I mean.
Yeah, but you look at the fact that Marcus Pettersson is still to me a guy that they could look to move because of the cap hit. But man, you're really relying then on a very young Ty Smith and a very young POJ on that left side. Now you could see Mark Friedman in the lineup as well. But to me, if you're trading Pettersson, it's probably to open up the spots for those 2, I would think. POJ is the name that's being thrown around, but at the same time, like he's not really helping you from like a cap perspective to upgrade the forward group. So that's to me why it's like Pettersson or Dumoulin are really the only 2 that you can move to help that bottom 6. And man, you mentioned, what they're upgrading offensively from the defensemen and definitely in the transition game too, I would say. But you're also looking at the forward group and looking at what they've lost, and it's 40 goals from the likes of Evan Rodriguez and Danton Heinen. Where are those being replaced by? I understand that you're going to have a full season of Ricard Raquel. Like you feel like Drew O'Connor's ready to make that jump. Hopefully, like a healthy Jason Zucker. But man, I looked at that bottom six right now, and I think that is not an NHL bottom six. Like Josh Archibald being brought in moves the needle none for me. It actually might go the other way for me. I hate that he's on this team. And apparently Johan Larsson's not coming. I don't know what's going on with that because I think he would have been a great addition for the bottom six, but whatever. Something's got to give here. This is not an NHL bottom six right now.
Yeah, I looking at the bottom six, it's kind of bleak, honestly, right now, because the center position is okay. I mean, like, we don't love Carter at center, but he can be a serviceable player still. For the most part,
He started out the season really well last year. Danny pointed it out. Like, I think that he ran out of gas, but a point that I just want to make here too, and I'm not saying that's going to be possible at his age to do so. No idea what his off-season regimen looks like. They had shortened seasons the previous 2 years. So, like, he could kind of, I don't want to say empty the tank, but he obviously didn't have to play as many games and he was more well rested. Goes back to a full season last year, and he just probably wasn't physically ready for that. Hopefully this offseason he knows how he has to have his body, what type of shape he has. I would have him working out with Chris Letang every day, to be honest. But
yeah,
I just want to make that point. Hopefully he's ready for an 82-game season.
Yeah. But, I mean, I'm just looking at the bottom six. Center, whatever. You have Carter and you have Bluger. I can live with those. I'm fine with those. I love Bluger as fourth line center. It's great. But then you look at the wings, and that's where the team is really struggling. Josh Archibald, I don't want him on the opening day roster, like in the top or in the bottom six. I mean, you brought in Ryan Poehling in that Jeff Petrie trade as well. Maybe he gets in there as well. But then you still have a underperforming Brock McGinn. I mean, he started off the season okay, but then the last half of the season wasn't that great. Kasperi Kapanen, you literally don't even know what kind of player this is anymore. He has the skill and the pedigree to be an okay player, and maybe whatever the expectation is going to be that he is a third-line winger, then maybe he'll perform better. At least that's what I'm hoping. Maybe I'm just trying to convince myself of that. But I don't know what I'm going to get from Kasperi Kapanen. And then we hope that Drew O'Connor is ready and gets the playing time, and maybe he can sustain some play up there. There's still, like, redeems a Hornet. You do have Alex Nylander down in Wilkes-Barre as well. Maybe he can get some time. We'll see, but you're missing a lot of goals. And when I look at the wingers on this, I don't see 40 goals. I mean, you saw 33 from Kapanen last year. Obviously, that was wrong. But
I'll say
if that's the case this year, then we only need to make up 7 more goals. We're fine. But between Jeff Carter, Brock McGinn, Kasperi Kapanen, Bluger, O'Connor, Archibald, Poehling, like, I don't see where they're going to make up all these goals.
Caglia or whatever. They brought in him as well. Yeah, I have no idea. Listen, even from like an offensive perspective, I mentioned like Johan Larsson, who Elliot Friedman put out there was signing with the Penguins, and here we are, a week later, and that still hasn't happened. But who knows what's going on? He's not necessarily a guy that's going to bring a bunch of offense either. Like, to me, that's a great, like, he honestly, who he reminds me of, maybe Penguin fans don't want to hear this, Zach Aston Reese. I think that you're replacing him if you bring in Johan Larsson, and that's fine. I think the Pens really miss Zach Aston Reese.
Yeah.
I would still do the trade for Rickard Rakell. But I think that, they obviously missed Zach Aston Reese on the penalty kill down the stretch there because you saw how drastically that dropped off. So, but
I mean, again, I think you have to make a move for another winger, and whether Hextall wants to say it or not. And I know GMs are weird. Like, they're not going to just show their hand. Every GM is not going to do that like Jim Rutherford did. Okay, I forgot Jim Rutherford was our GM. He literally showed his hand to his entire casino. But I just don't believe him when I said this doesn't mean that he's going to make another move. Because if that was the case, then why were you allude to, we're making a move when we have 9 defensemen? Oh, we have 9 defensemen still, but we're not going to make a move. Just doesn't make sense to me. And I'm not going to say it's like going to be the JT Miller trade that we all want. That seems really unrealistic at this point.
It seems like Vancouver wants to keep him.
Yeah, and I just think that you need to bring in somebody that can at least chip in like 15 to 20 goals on that third line or something like that. Like, you don't have to trade for an all-star. That's not what we're asking for. You just need someone to be contributors into that bottom 6, because whenever I just look at this bottom 6, it's very underwhelming for the players that have played there before. And it's for the guys like Poehling, and then I'll even throw in like Drew O'Connor into that one because we saw him in the just limited sample size. There's still more so just question marks as to what kind of players we're going to get in a full-time role in that bottom six. So looking at the top six is kind of like status quo. That's what we wanted. But bottom six, that's more question marks. That's more up in the air. Like where are we going to get the offense coming from? And honestly, maybe we make a trade. What if we get like a second line winger and move Zucker down to the third line? That would be great as well.
A healthy Jason Zucker would definitely be able to help drive play for like a Jeff Carter and a Kasperi Kapanen. So I think that makes it more palatable if something like that were to happen. Last thing with the Pens though that I want to talk about, obviously not like a major move here, but we know that teams going forward, like they mentioned this on the broadcast I was watching for free agency 2, are going to want to go in to the year like having 3 goalie. I mean, everybody wants goalie depth, but 3 one-way deals at goalie. Like you're going to see that a lot more often. Like just since COVID times, you're going to see it. Dustin Tokarski, obviously to me, an upgrade from Louis Domingue. I think that we even saw Dustin Tokarski play pretty well and steal a game against the Pens last year. Maybe specifically that game is what made the Penguins want him as their number 3 goalie. But from like a number 3 goalie perspective, I'm completely fine with this move. Like I said, he's better than Louis Domingue. I think in a pinch, if you have to have a guy play a game, with a lot of experience, obviously a little bit of a journeyman, but better than Louis Domingue. I'll say it again 3 times. How much more can I say it? Let me say it again, he's better than Louis Domingue. He's a 3rd goalie.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to say. You hope he doesn't have to play in the NHL. That's really where we're at. Knowing the Penguins, though, he's going to. He's going to start game 1 of the playoffs next year.
Yep.
So, but hopefully he doesn't have to play. So it's not really a big deal signing. And everybody I don't know how many times. Let me explain real quick. A one-way deal does not mean that they are going to be on the NHL roster. It just means they get paid the same whether they are in Wilkes-Barre or whether they are in Pittsburgh.
Yeah. Right.
There was a lot of confusion.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Looked like everybody was like
the waiver
stuff.
Is
the goalie going to be traded? What's going to happen? No, it's just you get paid the same.
See you, Tristan Jarry. We just brought in Dustin Tokarski. That's the end of your time here. Oh man.
That would. I
want to ask you a question when we come back. We're going to talk a little bit about the Steelers. I have a couple questions actually for you. We've talked a decent bit, I feel like, about the quarterbacks, but not necessarily like about the competition itself. So we're going to do that when we come back. This is Around the 412 on the UK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. And welcome back to Around the 412 on the DK Pittsburgh Sports Podcast Network. Let's wrap up the show talking about the Steelers training camp in a week, which is awesome. Obviously, now we go. Time's going to start flying here until the season kicks off. We've talked a little bit about the quarterbacks, sporadically here. Mitch Trubisky, Kenny Pickett. There's really the only 2 to talk about. Sorry, Mason Rudolph. Not really part of this conversation. Are we on the same page here? Well, let's start here because there might not be a follow-up depending on what your answer is to this. Does Mitch Trubisky start game 1?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So there is going to be a follow-up then because we needed to get that out of the way that we're both on the same page, thinking Trubisky opens up as the starter. Do we see Kenny Pickett start this season at all?
Like start a game?
Yes. Do you think Mitch Trubisky is able to hold him off for an entire season?
Yeah. And that's me hoping that Mitch Trubisky is good enough to do so. Maybe that's a blind hope, but that's what I'm hoping for. I think that Kenny Pickett, rightfully so, he should be the backup quarterback. Like that, you're bringing in Mitch Trubisky, and I know like Mitch Trubisky has a lot of baggage with his name, but like he was a number 2 overall pick pedigree, and maybe he shouldn't have been taken that high, but still, like he's a first round pick himself. He's played in the NFL. He has the experience. I would expect him, especially to start the season, to be better than Kenny Pickett. And this is me coming from, like, I want Kenny Pickett to succeed so bad, but also I want what's best for the Steelers. And what I think is best right now is for Kenny to sit and learn, especially if he can sit for a full year and learn more about the NFL and the game speed and offense and all that sort of stuff, reading defenses. I think it would be great for the Steelers. And I just don't think that unless Mitch plays like awful, or gets hurt, which honestly, like we said with the Penguins, Steelers quarterbacks getting hurt, you're more than likely going to see two quarterbacks start games for the Steelers. But unless the one gets hurt, I'm just expecting Mitch to be the starter for the entire season. I don't think we're in a Baker Mayfield, Tyrod Taylor scenario where with the Browns a few years ago where they were expecting Baker to take over at some point. I know fans are probably expecting that. Maybe some people in the Steelers organization are expecting that as well. But for me personally, I'm not expecting that. I'm expecting them to bring in Mitch and be the starter for the entire season. And they're not going to change that unless something goes bad.
I think too, like what makes the Steelers different and Tomlin different in this scenario is, for better or worse, they don't have their eye on the long-term future here. They have their eyes on the 2022 season. And like you mentioned, like Trubisky, at least to start, is going to give them the best chance to win week 1. Now, is that going to be the case as the season progresses?
Week 10, that might be different.
Yeah, but at least to start, we're on the same page here with it being Trubisky. Now, while I think it's completely fine to be an optimistic person here and think that Mitch Trubisky was dealt a bad hand and he can play better in Pittsburgh, and don't get me wrong, like that is a very real possibility. I think it can happen. I can't fully buy into just saying that. Like, I'm not just going to be one of those people that tweet out Mitch Trubisky's going to have a great season. Like, there's nothing behind that other than just optimism at this point. Because there's nothing that he has shown. I understand he made a Pro Bowl. I understand the Bears were in the playoffs because of their defense.
Twice.
Because of their defense, but yes, they were in the playoffs.
He was also the MVP.
He was the MVP. Can't take that away from him, obviously. But what I'm getting back to, because I feel like I'm kind of going on, like, this isn't an anti-Mitch thing, by the way, because I want him to be the starter week 1, and I think they can succeed with him. But point being that it's a very real possibility that we do see two different quarterbacks start games for the Steelers this year. They could make the switch in season. I'm hoping that that's not the case. And if Mitch is able to hold off Kenny for the entire year, I think that's a perfect scenario. Now, it'll be really interesting what happens if he does play really well and the Steelers have to make, I don't know how much of a decision it would be, because it's probably best case scenario if they can actually like get something for Trubisky in the offseason. But again, what does that do for the Steelers? Like, if Trubisky plays really well, they go to the playoffs, maybe even win a playoff game or something like that. What do the Steelers do? Because like we just mentioned, what's different about the Steelers and Tomlin is they want to win right now. They don't care about the future. If Trubisky does all that, would they really just, cut bait? Not just cut bait, but move him, trade him?
I don't think so. I think they'll just roll with the hot hand, honestly. And maybe
that would be crazy.
That's bad for Kenny Pickett, but I just feel like, and I've brought this up before on the show, that quarterbacks, the expectation is way too high right away. Even if you're the number 1 overall pick, to me, the expectation of quarterbacks is too high by fans and by
it's almost better to not
media.
Play. Yeah.
Like I just feel like if you don't come in and succeed right away, they immediately want to move on to the next guy. And now to go back to what you were saying about Mitch and how you don't necessarily think that
I don't know why people are acting like it's like a sure thing that this guy plays great in pitch.
I don't think
that's
it's a sure thing.
Yeah.
But I also do think the atmosphere of where he was playing in that Matt Nagy offense and everything. Look what's happened with Justin Fields. We were so high on Justin Fields. Look what's happened with him. Look at the state of that team. I'm not saying like that is the only excuse for a quarterback or for any player, but it definitely is going to harpen your play. But I think that Mitch Trubisky is going to come in and so far from what we heard, he's looked decent. I know his teammates enjoy playing with him. So I think that it's really good for Pickett to at least sit for at least part of a season, but I think a full season would be great. And I'm not comparing him to Patrick Mahomes. Don't get me wrong, but that's exactly what Patrick Mahomes did. He sat an entire season. I think it's beneficial for young quarterbacks to be able to come in and do that. I just feel like, and I've said it again, I'll say it one more time. It's just unfair, the expectation set by fans and media on young quarterbacks, especially first-round quarterbacks, to come in and perform right away. I feel like that's just like unpredictable. And I don't think you can set the bar that high right away because college and NFL is vastly different. They have to take the time to learn the game at this level. And so
Mhm.
if Kenny can do that behind Mitch, I think it will be great for the Steelers' future and for this season.
Now, this is a different question, but also, kind of relating to the team as training camp approaches. There's still, to me, a couple of areas where I would love to see them add somebody from the outside. Now, I put out a tweet today because Tarleton Hassib was just in the news. He did a little interview talking about, like, really the only reason that he came out was for kids, that don't feel brave enough to do so and just wanted to be like their outlet and show them that it's okay. Um, but from a football standpoint, to me, if you add this guy to the roster, he's their third best edge rusher behind TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith. So I put out, I would like to see the Steelers sign him. Now, specifically, it doesn't necessarily have to be him, but edge to me is a position where I would love to see the Steelers add somebody else. Sorry that I don't trust Derek Tuska or Jannard Avery as edge 3 for this team. Talked about having to play like 15 or so snaps for TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith breathers. And that's not even
Hey,
taking into
don't
consideration.
forget Tuzar Skipper's back. Okay, put some
Our
respect
skipper is
on his
back,
name.
yeah. And that's not even taking into consideration, like, what if one of those guys goes down? Like,
Right.
then who is it? So I'm looking at edge and I'm looking at running back, behind Najee. We could talk about that all day, and I feel like we have in the past. So to me, those are the two positions where I'd love to see them add somebody else. What say you?
I agree with both of those. So running back was one of the ones for sure for me, and we've talked about the backup running backs a lot in this Najee Harris era. Najee's the bell cow, and Benny Snell
Kind of put two
and
things
Anthony
together
McFarland. Yeah, I just mixed them up. But Benny Snell and Anthony McFarland just don't have the production behind Harris to really add anything to the offense. It's like, why would I want them on the field whenever I could just put Najee out there? I get saving Najee some of the reps to keep him fresh or more fresh, but they're not going to add any production to the offense. It's different if you have a guy that can get you a couple yards when he goes in, but 0-yard gains, negative gains. I mean, I know Benny Snell is going to have a 100-yard game somewhere in the season, but overall, the backup running back position is pretty. I don't even know if I'd call it mediocre. It's probably just below average. And then, like you said, the depth at edge is very questionable. We don't know what it's going to look like if TJ Watt or Alex Highsmith goes down. Hopefully that doesn't happen. And it would be different too if like we knew like, okay, like what position is like DeMarvin Leal going to be playing and how much he's going to be playing right away. I feel like they just didn't really address traditional edge that much. They kind of got like hybrid as with it. And then one other position to me, and this is more just so like a depth move than the actual starters, is corner. I still don't really love the cornerback depth. And especially for how much like the Steelers like to play with 3 corners on the field at a time. If one of those guys goes down, like looking at like Ahkello Witherspoon, Cam Sutton, and Levi Wallace, after that, I don't really trust a lot of the cornerback room behind them. I wish I did more. Like we wish that like James Pierre would be what we thought he would be. But from what we saw last season, we can't really trust that. So I don't love the depth there. I like the starters, just don't love the depth.
Yeah. And that's an interesting point too, because it's like, man, like how many corners do you need in this day and age? Because like you mentioned, with how often you play 3, even though like slot is basically a completely different, like you have to be a completely different player to play that. Like Arthur Millette can do some of the things in there required of a slot corner, but he's not the complete package. Obviously, he's still on the roster, so I figure I'd throw him in. And then James Pierre and Justin Lane, the backups on the outside. So I could see the argument for adding another outside body for sure. But like you said, I'm also very comfortable with what they have in terms of starters. And I think that to the Steelers, credit or fault, whatever one you really want to say here, I think that they just trust their system and their pass rush so much. They take so much emphasis away from cornerback play. Like they think they can plug anybody in there and they'll be okay because of the pass rush that they generate. Now, the problem is when they don't do that, you're going to see scenarios like what we saw, a couple times last year with James Pierre getting picked on.
I wonder if they got that idea from across the locker room when they were scouting Kenny Pickett. They were also scouting the Pitt defense. All pass rush, no secondary.
Yeah, yeah. But also to the Pitt corners' credits or Narduzzi's discredit, they might have the toughest tasks in the entire college football world.
I think that's why they're good. Like you've seen Pitt corners have success.
They transition well
because
they're better players in the pros.
They're used to playing on an island, like literally just playing man all the time.
I look like I'm about to go to an island right now, I think. So
true. But yeah, last thing on the defense, just like overall, I feel like if no one gets hurt, the defense is great. I think the starters look great, but you can't really bank on nobody getting hurt, and that's where the problem lies.
Yeah. I mean, even, from a starter standpoint, really banking on bounce back years from both Miles Jack and Devin Bush. Obviously, Miles Jack wasn't in Pittsburgh last year, but he was not good in Jacksonville. So hopefully those guys can both bounce back together, and Brian Flores is going to be a big part of that. Anything else?
No. Football is starting soon, and then once training camp starts, we're going to have football all the way until February, folks. 6 months with
Love to
just
hear
football. Well, not just football. Might seem like that to a lot of people, but
it is for a lot of people. Yeah, especially in Pittsburgh. And you watching or listening to this have the opportunity to get in on the chance to go to Steelers Ravens. All you have to do is follow us and retweet, not our pinned tweet right now, but we retweet it all the time. I'm sure you guys have seen it. We're giving away Steelers Ravens tickets, 2 pairs once we hit 17,000 followers. If we hit 20,000, we're going to give a second pair away for a different game, unless it is the same one that you want to go to, but that will be your prerogative. So do that. Also, our pinned tweet now is for Rocking Around the 412, our Christmas mission that kicks off every year in July. I want to end this show not necessarily talking so much about the mission, but talking about one of the people that make this mission what it is. I know that he wouldn't want to get the acknowledgement here because he's not that type of person. But Mike, everybody knows Mike in Illinois, made a very generous donation over the course from our last episode to this episode. I don't remember exactly what day it was. Let's just say, like, he himself, every year that we've done this, has donated more than enough to cover an entire family. And you guys know how much we do for each family. So, Mike, man, I can't give you a big enough shout out. Everything that you've done for us from the beginning. Like, he was probably one of the first 10 people to follow us on Twitter. He was one of the first 5 people listening. I mean, everything that we've done, he's been one of the very first ones there. So we can't thank him enough. And obviously his support for this mission is, it means a lot.
Yeah. And it's not just this year too. It's been like pretty much every year we've done it.
Every year.
So it's been great. Mike, thank you. Sucks you're a Notre Dame fan, but that's okay. I'm just kidding. I'm fine with Notre Dame fans, just not the school.
Couldn't get out of here with at least one jab.
Yeah. but yeah, seriously, you're awesome. Thank you. And everybody else, just go check out Rocking Around the 412 on GoFundMe.com. If you don't have Twitter, we always forget, like, some people don't have Twitter.
Some people
GoFundMe.com. You can search Rockin' with around the 412, Rockin' without a G, and it should pop up. You'll see the mission. You can read about it. Link to donate there as well if you want to help us out.
All right. Well, on that note, we will get out of here. We're not going to take up any more of your guys' time. We can't thank you enough for watching or listening to Around the 412. Be sure to check out all the other content on the DT Pittsburgh Sports family. Leave us a like, subscribe to the channel, leave us a 5-star review if you're listening somewhere else. Subscribe there as well. And until next week, we will see you then. Bye-bye.